On June 5th, finally, at 10:10 T15 ET, astronauts Butch, Wilmore, and Suni Williams launched into orbit on board Boeing Starliner spacecraft. The spacecraft quickly developed problems, and while they made it to the International Space Station, the problems continued to mount, and Starliner was eventually forced to return to Earth unmanned. This forced them to remain in space for another 9 months beyond what was planned. Finally, the flight that will end their time in space has arrived at the International Space Station.
It's not a pause at waypoint 1, but it should proceed towards the keep out sphere. You'll notice some of the views change throughout our coverage here. The feeds coming from Dragon, you can see illuminating the International Space Station. Those feeds provided
Dragon,
by ground
SpaceX
stations.
On the big loop. Approach 1 and soft capture ring extension will begin shortly. Dragon will continue its approach to waypoint 2.
SpaceX, Dragon, copy all.
That relayed from the SpaceX core in Hawthorne, California, confirmed by the crew aboard Endurance. We are proceeding inside the keep out sphere. You are seeing the docking light begin to blink at the center of Dragon Endurance. Features of Dragon becoming a little bit more apparent. The nose cone fully open, exposing the docking ring and the forward bulk of the Dracos. You did hear that Dragon will extend the soft docking ring mechanism. This allows for a cushioned contact as Dragon makes its way toward the International Docking Adapter. Docking comes in several phases, which includes contact and a soft capture, which is initiated by the docking ring. That docking ring is retracted to pull Dragon in closer to the International Space Station, and then begin a sequence to hard dock Dragon to the International Space Station. There are 12 hooks that are driven to really latch Dragon to the International Space Station. They're deployed in 2 sets of 6. And those will be confirmed by the crew. Once all of the hooks are driven, there is also an umbilical that extends and connects to an interface on the International Space Station side to provide power and data transfer between the 2 vehicles. Dragon right now operating on battery power and solar power that's generated from the trunk. Once Dragon attaches to the International Space Station, it'll be receiving power from the International Space Station through the duration of its stay aboard. We did hear confirmation that Dragon is passing waypoint 1. So we're now moving inside the docking axis and towards the keep out sphere. Now passing waypoint 1, Dragon Endurance heading towards the International Space Station. We're following along from here inside Mission Control Houston, working jointly with the teams in Hawthorne, California, to take us through the next series of steps, including crossing the keep out sphere and heading towards waypoint 2. Let's send it back over to Anna and Chris in Hawthorne.
And thanks, Gary. Yeah, so we have passed waypoint 1, so waypoint 2 is what is up next, and that will put Dragon only about 20 meters.
Station Houston on the big loop. Monitor approach per step 3 of 1.102, Dragon approach and retreat monitoring. Let us know when your review is complete and you are ready for docking.
You heard that.
Station copies on the big loop step 3, and I can confirm that the review is complete and we're ready for docking.
So that call there between the ISS Flight Control Room and the crew on board the International Space Station.
Houston copies. At waypoint 2, Dragon will hold for approximately 5 minutes.
And you heard that call there indicating that the ISS
Thanks for the heads up.
and the crew there are now ready for Dragon's docking to the forward docking adapter of the Harmony module of the International Space Station. Dragon approaching waypoint 2, which is the point about 20 meters from the International Space Station's forward docking adapter. And as we did just hear there, we are expecting Dragon to hold for about 5 minutes once it reaches that point. It crossed through waypoint 1 and waypoint 0 without having to hold. But again, these waypoints or checkpoints are places we can hold if we need to, and if we don't, we can proceed forward through them.
And so we have gone through 2 of those waypoints, so waypoint 0 and 1, and so now Dragon is less than 200 meters away from the International Space Station, about 170 meters currently, away from its target of that forward node 2 forward docking port. And there you're seeing a great view on your screen of the Dragon Endurance spacecraft as it makes its final approach to the International Space Station. The teams in Mission Control Houston the teams at the International Space, or not the International Space Station, the SpaceX Mission Control teams behind us are, of course, doing some final go, no-go polls for docking. It's one of the final checkpoints between those teams to make sure everyone is good to proceed and to dock. We did hear that there will likely be a brief hold at waypoint 2. And again, that waypoint 2 is just 20 meters away from the International Space Station, so very close at that point. So they will hold briefly, and then from there, we will have our final approach and docking. We will have an initial soft capture. We did hear that the soft capture ring was being extended a few minutes ago. And then from there, they will begin to deploy those hooks, 2 sets of 6 for a total of 12 hooks to get that hard capture. And during that final hold, that again, we're expecting around the waypoint 2 mark, which is 20 meters away from the space station. During that final hold, they can possibly wait for better lighting conditions. So the space station does have exterior lights and Dragon can dock in the dark. But of course, we go through an orbit every 90 minutes. So there's a sunrise and sunset every 45 minutes. So if they need to wait for a little bit of improvement in the lighting conditions, they can use that waypoint 2 hold opportunity to wait for things like that, ensure final alignment, ensure everyone is good to go for that final approach and docking.
And as we could see right there, right before we switch to the inside view there, that's a great view on the outside. You can see that we're passing into an orbital sunset here, so approaching orbital night. And you can see how that lighting is very different on board the International Space Station. But what I love about that view, too, is you can see the forward navigation strobe light from Dragon illuminating the forward element of the International Space Station where it will be docking just a few minutes from now. But of course, approaching waypoint 20. This is a view now from the International Space Station looking at Dragon. You can see the white navigation light indicating the center of the docking alignment axis there. And the green light that you see is the starboard navigation light. So just helping the folks on the International Space Station keep track of Dragon's orientation there. And the red one that just came into view is for the port side orientation. And I really love this too as we get into orbital night as we're approaching the space station, because we're probably going to see Dragon's Draco thrusters pulsing, and that's always a sight to behold in orbital night.
And so Dragon and the International Space Station.
Soft capture ring extension complete.
And we just heard confirmation that that soft capture ring extension has been fully completed. So that extension of the soft capture ring, it's fully out and ready for that soft capture, that initial contact with the International Space Station. So right now, the International Space Station and Dragon are currently flying over Canada. And they're continuing to make its final approach to the International Space Station, currently just over 100 meters away as it makes its way to that waypoint 2, which is 20 meters away. So a little over 80 meters to go to the international, or to that waypoint 2. And then that final initial capture, and then we'll have the hooks deploy and have that hard capture milestone.
Now, as you're looking there at the SpaceX Mission Control here in Hawthorne, California, where we are, Dragon up on orbit as it is approaching waypoint 2 on that docking axis for the forward docking adapter. It's approaching the space station very, very slowly, about a few tenths of a meter per second, and it's also trying to keep in proper alignment with that docking port. But again, waypoint 2 is where we're going to stop based on the calls, and we can do some final alignments there and final checkouts. But so far so good for Dragon. About 28 hours after liftoff now, after lifting off from the Kennedy Space Center yesterday afternoon at 7:03 p.m., completing the docking in just a few minutes from now.
And so Dragon is now less than 100 meters away from the International Space Station as it continues to make that final approach. And so right now we're seeing those live views of the SpaceX Mission Control team here in Hawthorne, California. And typically we'll go back to these views when we do have those brief loss of signal between the International Space Station and Dragon and the ground. And we'll regain those views shortly. It's just a handover between satellites. So that tracking and data relay satellite system that the International Space Station relies on, they have a brief handover period between satellites, which causes a loss of those views periodically throughout our coverage.
Kind of like going from cell phone tower to cell phone tower.
And so Dragon is less than 80 meters away, so continuing to approach waypoint 2, about 60 meters to go until it reaches waypoint 2. Again, we are expecting Dragon to hold at waypoint 2 for just a few minutes to ensure final alignment, to ensure lighting conditions are good before we have that final docking. We are expecting that docking to take place around 9 a.m. Pacific, a little bit later than that. And right before that final docking takes place, we will hear that call for CHOP that we mentioned previously, which is the crew hands-off point. So right after you hear that call is typically when that soft capture takes place.
And that CHOP call that we've been talking about, and basically what that means is the crew can no longer manually abort Dragon away from the International Space Station if there should be a reason to do so. It would all be based on Dragon's automation at that point. Everything going very well for Dragon as it continues to approach the space station. The crew monitoring the automated approach for the vehicle, as well as any escape options they might have to do, but again, not expecting to have to use those.
Station Houston, on the big loop, the no exercise constraint for docking begins now.
Station copies.
And so you did just hear a call up from the CAPCOM, or capsule communicator at Mission Control in Houston, to the crew on the International Space Station, mentioning that the exercise constraint has started. So typically when you have visiting vehicles such as Dragon arriving and departing the International Space Station, there are constraints on crew exercise, and that's basically to prevent additional loads from being imparted on the station during these dynamic operations.
And I love this sort of night vision-esque view here from Dragon looking at the International Space Station. So this is a view from the Dragon Endurance carrying the Crew 10 crew. The forward docking port there is in the center of your screen, sort of being illuminated every few seconds by that light from Dragon. And what I love about this is you can see the Crew 9 Dragon directly above that docking port. And of course, Crew 9 going to be coming home after a brief handover period with the Crew 10 crew. And then inside of Dragon Endurance here, you have Commander Ann McLean on the left-hand side of your screen, pilot Nicole Ayers on the right. Next to Nicole is Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov, and on Ann's left is JAXA, or Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Takuya Onishi. Ann and Takuya are returning to the International Space Station for their second long-duration missions, and Nicole and Kirill are on their first missions to space.
So it's getting pretty real for the 4 crew members that make up Crew 10. Right now, they are just under 25 meters away from the International Space Station, so just outside of that waypoint 2, which is that point at which Dragon will hold for a few minutes.
On the big loop, you see we're approaching waypoint 2. Crew visors are closed.
Copy. Crew 10 visors are closed.
We did just hear that confirmation that the crew is approaching waypoint 2, so they see that on those screens in front of them. They see the distance, and they're able to monitor that approach as well.
And this is great because you can see Dragon's Draco thrusters firing here. You've got the red and the green navigation lights as well as the white one, but all those little flashes and pulses that you're seeing around the vehicle are the thrusters, keeping that alignment as we continue to approach waypoint 2, 20 meters from the ISS, where again, we are expecting to hold for a few minutes up. And you can see we're really getting close considering now we're really illuminating that forward docking port with Dragon.
And so Dragon is actually at that waypoint 2 mark now, just around 20 meters away. So we will have that hold briefly. And recently, the team in Mission Control Houston did conduct their final go, no-go pull as
Dragon
well for docking.
SpaceX on the big loop. Dragon is holding at waypoint 2 for Dragon eye assessment.
You hear that confirmation?
SpaceX Dragon, copy.
And if you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad. You are looking at live views from the International Space Station as Crew Dragon Endurance holds at waypoint 2, preparing to dock to the International Space Station in just about 7 minutes from now. If you haven't yet, take a moment, engage that like button, and subscribe so you never miss another live docking at the International Space Station with our 24/7 ISS live station-to-ground coverage. Here at the launch pad, it's our mission to inform and inspire the explorers of tomorrow because we believe that space is better together, and we bring you full live launch coverage, in-space operations, and more. Let's listen back in to NASA and SpaceX Mission Control as we prepare for the docking of Crew 10 to the ISS. You can see those thrusters firing. Looks like they're getting ready to continue their approach to the station momentarily. Make sure you stay with us, though, after docking for confirmation of soft capture and hard capture, and we'll be taking you live all the way through the hatch opening, welcome ceremony for Crew 10, and the departure farewell ceremony for Crew 9. So don't head out anywhere. Let's listen back in to Mission Control.
Forward docking port.
And we heard
Dragon is in approach 2.
we hear good confirmation of Dragon in that approach 2 mode, meaning it has passed waypoint 2 and is coming into the station. Again, you can see
Station Houston on the big loop. Dragon is on final approach and is go for docking. Monitor per steps 5 and 6 in 1.102 Dragon approach and retreat monitoring.
Station copy.
and that was the call from the International Space Station Flight Control Room to the crew on the ISS. Again, just everyone confirming, making sure everyone's on the same page as Dragon is now very close to docking with the International Space Station here today.
And so Dragon is now just 17 meters away from the International Space Station and continuing to close in on its target. Coming up here shortly, we will likely hear that call out for CHOP, which stands for Crew Hands Off Point. That typically takes place less than 30 seconds before docking. So as soon as you hear that, you know that that docking will take place very soon after. And then at that point, when we hear the CHOP call out, any aborts will have to be done automatically by Dragon. And so also on the International Space Station, we have NASA astronaut Nick Hague monitoring this final approach. And then once Dragon is docked, NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore will walk through those hatch preparation and opening steps to welcome the crew on board. And Dragon is now less than 14 meters away from the International Space Station and continuing that final approach.
These very delicate series of maneuvers now. Dragon approaching very, very slowly relative to the International Space Station. Again, we talked earlier that launch is all about accelerating the vehicles to orbital velocity, and even though both Dragon and the ISS are traveling at about 17,500 miles per hour or 27,500 kilometers per hour, they are moving very, very slow, like 1/10 of a meter per second in relation to each other right now.
Dragon now at about 10 meters away from the International Space Station. We're standing by for that call out for CHOP here shortly.
SpaceX Dragon, 10 meters.
Copy, 10.
And again, you're looking at the forward docking port of the International Space Station, which is mounted to the Harmony or Node 2 module of the space station. The Crew 9 Dragon, which has been there since September, is also attached to a docking port on this module, and that Dragon is actually just off the top of your screen there as Crew 10's Dragon comes in for docking in just a few moments. And I love these views again. You've got the Dragon, you've got the ISS staring at Dragon on the left-hand side of your screen, and you've got Dragon looking at its docking port on the ISS on the right.
And Dragon is now less than 7 meters away from the International Space Station as it continues to make that final approach. Traveling with a range rate of less than 0.082, which, as you mentioned earlier, it continues to get slower and slower as we make this final approach.
5 meters.
Copy, 5 meters.
So the next call we should hear is chop, or that crew hands-off period, followed moments later by docking.
That typically comes at about 2 meters away from the International Space Station. Right now, we're less than 4 meters away. Less than 3 meters away.
2 meters, please hands off.
Copy, hands off.
There is the chop call.
Standing by for initial contact of Dragon to the International Space Station.
Dragon contact and soft capture complete.
And there you heard Dragon has successfully docked to the International Space Station. We have contact and soft capture confirmed. Soft capture meaning that the initial soft capture ring around Dragon has physically connected with the International Docking Adapter. And this is just the first part of the overall docking sequence, Anna.
And so we did have that contact confirmed at 9:04 p.m. Pacific, 11:04 p.m. Central, while both Dragon and the International Space Station were flying 260 stat sheet miles.
Capture ring retraction in progress.
Flying 260 stat sheet miles over the Atlantic Ocean, and we did just hear confirmation that that soft capture ring is now beginning to retract. So they're beginning those steps to firmly attach Dragon to the International Space Station so that we can have what is known as a hard capture.
And again, as we mentioned earlier, like all the timings of these events are a little nebulous and they can change around by a couple of minutes here. So while we were expecting completion of we're expecting the completion of soft capture ring retraction, which we heard was already underway in just a few minutes. That will be followed by the start of the hard capture sequence, which is a series of 12 hooks that are separated into 2 batches of 6 that drive between Dragon and the International Space Station to really hard connect them together. And then after we have that, we have a whole bunch of other things that sort of come into place at that point once Dragon is securely on the Harmony module of the ISS. Once those soft capture systems retract, the spacecraft will we're getting closer for the hard capture. And then and that's about a 15-minute process.
And so once those hooks are fully driven, so those 2 sets of 6 hooks for a total of 12, then we will see those umbilicals deploy. And again, that helps to hardline the data and power from the International Space Station to Dragon. And then the crew on the International Space Station, as well as Dragon, will get ready for the hatch opening operation. So they will have to pressurize the vestibule. Again, that is that space between the Dragon hatch and the Space Station hatch that was previously exposed to the vacuum of space prior to this docking. Again, we had that docking initial capture at 9:04 p.m. Pacific. So they will work to pressurize that space, perform a series of leak checks, and then once everything is good and they get the go-ahead, they will open those hatches. Again, there's the hatch on Dragon that has to be open, as well as the station hatch, to then bring the crew tent onto the International Space Station. And there you're actually getting a live view from the International Space Station looking at the station hatch that will have to be opened before you can get to the Dragon hatch and bring the crew on board. And they will be welcomed by the Expedition 72 crew. And they will have a brief welcoming ceremony, and then they will go into a safety briefing and get up to speed and adjust to life on station. Again, completing that handover period with the Crew 9 crew before Crew 9 returns home.
And then they get to work. Because as exciting as the last 28 hours have been from launch until docking, this is just the beginning of a multi-month mission for Crew 10. They're joining the Expedition 72 crew, which has been ongoing for the last few months aboard the International Space Station. And about a month from now, when a Soyuz crew rotation from Russia completes, that will actually mark the start of Expedition 73, which our Crew 10 crew will be joining. And of course, there are about 200 science experiments that the crew will be performing over the course of their multi-month mission up there. And I can't wait to see it and everything that they're going to be able to do up there.
So they will be contributing to about 200 different experiments and technology demonstrations from human research. They're doing some flammability studies.
Ring retraction complete. Docking sequence is holding for MCS reconfiguration.
Butch, Wilmore, and Suni Williams are expected to be leaving the ISS on Wednesday and returning to Earth shortly thereafter. We will provide a report of the reentry and splashdown when they do return. If you like this content, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Also, please help support this channel. See the description for details.